Okay, today we're going to talk about groups of people that are considered protected groups when it comes to statistical study or research. Um, there are classes of vulnerable populations that are actually protected by federal law, and these are ones that are specifically identified and have laws pertaining to them. Pregnant women is a big one. The second one are human fetuses. So human fetuses are protected from study by federal regulations. Doesn't mean that you can't study these groups, but you have to meet certain guidelines within the law to do that. Neonates. So any newborn child. Prisoners are protected under the law. Children, so anyone under the age of majority, under the age of 18 in the United States, is protected under the law. And in particular, individuals with HIV or AIDS are also protected under federal law. Usually what would make a group protected under law are one of three criteria. One is that they would have an inability to consent. So, like the group 2, the group 3, the group 4, and the group 5 here all have an inability to consent because of some restriction or reality about their personhood. Number 2 is that there is higher risk and low reward in most of their studies. So this is where we get to the pregnant women, the human fetus, the neonates, and individuals with HIV and AIDS tends to have a higher risk when studied. And you also have potential for coercion. So definitively, groups that would fall under this may be children and prisoners, may be or even people with HIV/AIDS, because of some of the stigma that surrounds that particular disease, may have a larger potential for coercion in a study. Now, not every vulnerable group is protected by law, but usually IRB boards will look at other realities, and they tend to look at what we call 6 types of vulnerability. So we have 6 types of vulnerability that a test subject could possibly have, and why we should give special caution to groups that have these vulnerabilities. One would be a cognitive or communicative vulnerability. So someone in this group usually is a person with a disability that either causes a challenge to their mental functioning or an ability of their ability to communicate clearly. This goes to like the ability to give consent, the ability to communicate results. This is a particularly challenged group. Another group would be a group that has an institutional vulnerability. So institutional vulnerability might be someone like a prisoner who is in an institution that is already designed to restrict their behavior. Students are in an institutional vulnerability because there is consequences to student actions that can be leveraged against them. There's what we call deferential vulnerability. Definitely you don't want like spouses involved in a research project. Like if I am the principal investigator, my spouse should not be involved in this. Children are also in a position where there's deferential vulnerability because they may be like conceding to the wills of adults because they're in a position of minority. So that would be a place that is problematic. Someone who is medically vulnerable would be a person who has like a disease or a disorder for which there are no current satisfactory treatment options. So like if you have a disease or a disorder or something like a form of cancer where there's no form of like current treatment options are not working, and you're like, hey, would you like to do this trial? It could help you. It gives people false hope and ultimately leads them into being in a vulnerable position. Let's take a look at number 5 here, are people with economic vulnerabilities. So these are people who are either in insecure employment, like feeling like they have to be able to do this trial in order to keep their job, or in insecure housing. This goes to like the Kennedy-Krieger thing, like, well, if I don't do this trial, will I lose my, with lead paint, will I lose my my housing voucher? Income vulnerability. These are folks that are low income and are, at risk for all kinds of things. And we don't want to be testing low income folks without making sure that they are, that low income is why they are participating in the test. There's also what we would refer to as social vulnerability, and these are just anybody who are seen as less than, either in their own eyes or in the general population. This can be really tricky because it could be something where there's an influence of racism, an influence of sexism, discrimination by gender identity. This can even be like we said earlier, people who have HIV/AIDS are a protected class because oftentimes there's a stigma to that disease and they're afraid that if they don't comply with something that they may be outed. So these are all types of vulnerability that IRBs need to take into account: cognitive or communicative, institutional, differential, medical, economic, or social. So this may not be something that gets captured in law, but is definitely something that will be picked up by IRB boards in order to protect the people who are being studied as subjects. All right, thank you.